Welcome back to another one of my Boku no Hero theory videos. I'm your host Dab, and today we will be going over Gigantomachia potentially being Deku's father. First though, I do want to go over some basics with quirks to help better explain what the points I'm getting at are. We know that quirks are inherited from the parents. In the rare cases, of course, you have the quirks that are, of course, given to people, but for now I want to mainly focus on the ones that are inherited. You either get one, both, or a mix of the quirks. Rare cases where the development of a quirk that is different do occur. That, of course, is Eri, and then on the most recent chapter is hinted that Tomuru also might be one of those cases. And then, just to use some character references to reference each type, of course, we have Bakugo, who is a mix of his two parents, of his mother and father. Shoto, of course, received both. And then, of course, like I had mentioned, Eri is one of those rare cases where she developed a quirk that neither one of her parents had developed. We know 80% of the world have manifested quirks, so that leaves about 20% of the world that does not have a quirk that is known of. We know quirks can be flashy or hidden, such as with One for All, as it only worked as a quirk that passes on other quirks, so it required another quirk to be usable. This means that a quirk that has no outer action can go unnoticed by society itself, and thus you being deemed quirkless. Having multiple quirks appears to be extremely rare. Out of all the characters we've met, we've only really seen either the Nomus or with Giganto, Deku, and Shoto having multiple quirks, not including, of course, All for One. Now, to get to the main point here is, of course, that Gigantomachia is Deku's father. The reason I bring this up is because we know with Giganto, he was hidden away before Tomuru was taken in by All for One. Seeing how Tomuru is, of course, about the age of 20, and depending on where you are at in the reading, of course, Deku ranges between about the ages of 14 and 16 during the time at the academy so far. If you go with the math that Tomuru was taken in about the age of 5, then when he was rescued, and I use the term rescued loosely, we also know that Deku's father has been absent for that time, so if you think there's about a 5 to 6 year gap there, that would mean that Deku's father, who's been missing pretty much all of Deku's life, would have been absent, thus leaning towards that Gigantomachia was once again hidden away before Tomuru was taken in. And of course, during this period, Deku might have been born without Gigantomachia knowing. He might have not been aware of that. He may not have told All for One that he had a family, either during the time that he was in hiding or right before going into hiding. We don't know about that. We of course know that with All for One, he will give quirks to force loyalty upon them. So if Deku's father, who we know has fire breathing, was, for example, quirkless at first, he would of course have been outcast by society, just how much like Deku was teased in school and treated like he was literally trash of society because he had no capabilities whatsoever. His father could have gone through a similar situation, but instead of where Deku ran into All Might, Deku's father ended up running into All for One, who then gave him a quirk in return for loyalty, which was most likely fire breathing at first, and then thus he met, Deku's mother, and then of course Deku was born, and having that in that case resulted in Deku being so-called quirkless. We do know another thing is that Gigantomachia has multiple quirks, and this is another important part, because as we know, there's a lot of theories out there that Deku was not quirkless, so I believe Gigantomachia was also not quirkless. He has a quirk that allows him to activate multiple quirks or use multiple quirks without having to have the body modification. And as we've seen, that Deku has also manifested another quirk thanks to, of course, One for All. So if he inherited his father's quirk of being able to use and have multiple quirks, then that would make sense of Deku's quirk being absorbed by One for All, and then thus activating the other quirks that have been hidden away in it, and that's why he is special out of the other people that, of course, have had it and not manifested those quirks. All for One may have realized this and used this to create the Nomus from Giganto, and of course could have also realized that halfway through this that Giganto had that quirk, and thus started putting more quirks into him, empowering him up, and thus giving him more of a status within his ranks. And that's, of course, like I was saying, that's why Deku inherited his father's original unknown quirk, and that of is, of course, the multiple quirk activation. And just like with all for one, giving one for all to his brother, of course, ended up creating that quirk by giving him that power-up quirk, and it intermingled because originally he thought his brother was quirkless. So in this case, they thought Deku was quirkless, and in fact turned out he was not. If you also look at the situation, Giganto looks up to All for One, much like Deku looks up to All Might. So they ended up having different side of the spectrums approach them essentially and give them a quirk, but both had major different effects here. One, of course, is good. The other one is, of course, on the side of evil. But as we've seen, Gigantomachia doesn't just commit violence just to do it, as when he met with Mina when he was looking for Springer's agency. He didn't just outright kill them. He got frustrated and, of course, put his hands into the wall and started crushing it. And he's very emotional, just like with how Deku constantly breaks down into tears and has those emotional reactions. And as we know, of course, the Doctor will most likely get the droplet of blood from the League of Villains, and then he might be able to figure out that Giganto is Deku's father and seek to capture Deku for study, because once again, Deku has that quirk, and we know that he's going to want to improve the Nomus. He's already said he's going for that masterpiece. Once again, we know that the ultimate outcome will probably be that Deku is, in theory, the perfect Nomu, much like Giganto is probably the origin of Nomus. Once again, thank you for listening to my theory that Giganto is Deku's father, and they share a quirk that allows the user to maintain and use multiple quirks. In my next theory video, we will be going over the potentially dark side of UA Academy. Please join Kor and myself in our next chapter review coming later this week.
Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications for new videos.
Thank you so much to my littlest hero for closing that out, and you all have an Ultra Plus day.